welcome back to the PUP, Precept Upon Precept podcast with JK. I'm excited, you guys. I'm really excited. Thank you for tuning in once again. Our first audio recording was really to just give you a background of what PUP is, where the name came from, what we're gonna be doing. And so if you missed that, please you can check on the podcast. It's there. You'll be able to tap in and get a full idea of what Precept Upon Precept is all about and how it came about. But today, as I had promised, we're going to start on the introduction of the book of Romans. I love the book of Romans so much. I mean, you guys, this is one of the best, amazing books in the Bible. Like, look, if you know the book of Romans and the doctrine, because the book of Romans, it's really, ideally, it talks about the gospel in its full length. The arguments that Paul, it's an argument. It's a well-crafted argument that Paul puts out there to really explain the gospel. And we're going to look at all those. You're going to see all those things here. So basically, we're going to be looking at who the author is. Of course, I've already mentioned that Paul, and we're going to see the audience and how the church in Rome was and how it started, why he was writing to them, what was the message and the theme of this book, and I'll also give you some slight outlines of each chapter and how on what we are really going to be doing. But guys, just brace yourself. This book is so amazing. We are going to have a lot of fun. I mean, it's going to be so amazing. So Romans, the Paul's letter to the Romans. So right from chapter 1, you can see that Paul is the author. He says this in Romans chapter 1. Let me get there. Romans chapter 1, he says, Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God. Now, unlike in our current times, when you're writing a letter, usually in our current times, you want to put the person who is receiving the letter up. Dear John, dear, maybe it's a love letter, you put the name of the person you are writing to. Look, and then at the end, that's when you put your name, yours faithfully, what, your loving friend, and you put your name. But in the old times, the system was like, the person who is writing, you start with your letter. Paul, a bond servant of Jesus Christ. I'll explain all that in later on. But Paul, you see the idea, it's Paul writing, and that's how you begin. It's not that the letter is being written to Paul, no. It is Paul writing. In the old times, Roman system, Roman way of doing things, I think, ideally, because in Paul's time, ideally, everywhere where he did his missionary journeys, most of it was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire was it was a big deal that time. But that was really the system back then. Like, the author starts with their name. You start with your introduction. You introducing yourself to the people you're going to write to. So that's where you see that actually the book was written by Paul. It was written by Paul. And obviously he wrote it to the what? He wrote it to the Romans. So the audience is Romans, but there is more to that. Now, Rome is the capital city of what? Italy, right? It's a capital city of Italy. So, first of all, let me talk about Paul's right to write to them. Now, these are not Jews, ideally. To a great extent, the people in Italy are not Jews. People in Jerusalem, you can say they are Jews. People in Israel, they are Jews. But Italians, these are Gentiles. These are non-Jews to a great extent. Now, I'm saying to a great extent because there were some Jews there, and you will see it. There were some Jews there, but the vast majority of them were not what? Were not Jews. So it was a Gentile community to the greatest extent. Now look at this. Paul had a right to write to them because look, when you go to Galatians chapter 2, and in Galatians really defending himself because he had issues with this church also. Galatians chapter 8 says, let's start from 7. But on the contrary, Galatians 2 chapter 7, but on the contrary, when they saw that the gospel for the uncircumcised had been committed to me, as the gospel for the circumcised was to Peter, for he who worked effectively in Peter for apostleship to the circumcised also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. And when James, Cephas, and Peter, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that had been given to me, they gave me and Barnabas the right of fellowship that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Now look, Paul is trying to say here, first of all, you saw Paul is an apostle. We'll look deeper into that. Yeah, but basically the term apostle means the sent one. He's the sent one. And from Galatians chapter 2, verse 7 to 8, you see that he had been given the grace, or the let me call it the grace, to take the gospel to the uncircumcised, that's to the Gentile. And Peter's ministry was to the circumcised, that's Israel. Those are the Jews. People who were circumcised, people who were under the law. That was Peter's ministry, was to those. He was to preach the gospel to them, to the circumcised. But Paul's ministry was to a great extent to the uncircumcised, that's the Gentiles. So he has a right to write to these Italians, to these Romans, because Rome is in Italy. So he had the right to write to them. And another reason he writes to them is because ideally no one had been to Rome. Yeah, no one had been to Rome before. There's no apostle. We don't have any record of any apostle who had ever been to Rome and preached the gospel there. And so look at when you go further and look at Romans 15 verses 20, this is what Paul says. And so I have made it my aim to preach the gospel, but where Christ was named, lest I should build on another man's foundation. Let's repeat that. And so I have made it my aim to preach the gospel, not where Christ was named, lest I should build on another man's foundation. Another reason for him to write to these people, or another right he had, is because no one had really been named in Rome. There was really no one Christ had not really been preached in Rome that particular time. No apostle had been there and preached. Had anyone been there, Paul is like, you know what, he would probably not have gone there, because he said, I don't want to go where someone else has been and I build on their foundation. I'm looking towards areas where no one has been. Yeah. And so Rome was a really a good place to write a letter and to share the gospel with those guys. So he's writing it to the Romans in Rome, and Rome at this particular time was a city. I mean, it should have been like trading with a lot of trade, a lot of business. There must have been many people in this city. It must have been one of those congested cities. Like, look, people were in Rome, yeah, and I feel like it was like a fertile ground to start up a church. And so Paul writes this, and it's to the Romans in Rome. The Romans, the people in Rome were to a great extent Gentiles, but they must have also been Jewish people, and I will defend that later on. Yeah. So that's settled. We have seen that author is Paul, and is writing it to the Romans. He has all the right to write to them, because this was the ministry that was given to him. He says Cephas, James, and John, who seemed to be pillars. So he tried to send him and Barnabas to the uncircumcised, to the Gentiles. You go and take the gospel to those guys, those who are not Jews. Go and take the gospel to them. Yeah. So, and the period in which he wrote this must have been between 57 AD. AD 57, AD 57, that was the time that Paul wrote this letter. And he wrote it while he was still in Corinth on his third missionary journey. And that's the time he wrote this letter to the Romans. Now, up to this point, by the way, Paul has never been to Rome. He has never been to Rome. Now, he has been all throughout the Roman Empire, because the Romans were like, look, these guys were taking everything. They were taking over. So he has been preaching the gospel all over the Roman empires, but he has never been specifically to Rome. He has never been specifically to the Roman, that capital city, to Rome. He has not been there yet. And sadly, he really never got to visit them in the way he thought he would. The only time he came to Rome was he was a prisoner, and he was eventually beheaded from Rome. Yeah. So look, it's kind of sad because he planned to visit them. As we'll go through the other verses, you see that he really planned to visit these guys and impart some spiritual gift to them. But the only time he got to come to Rome is towards the end of his ministry. That was in where? In Acts. It was in Acts 28, verse 30. That's when we see that he's in custody, he's in Rome, and he's there in chains. So he wrote this letter while he was in Corinth, and that's around 57, and he writes it to the church in Rome. Okay, so I want to talk about how the church in Rome really began. How did this church begin? Again, Paul had never been there. It's not like he went there and look, he made disciples immediately from there, and I said, guys, let's start a hosting center here. Nope, he had never been to Rome, and but we can say he's the one who started the church in a way, and I think this was also through discipleship, because the church must have physically been started by fellow workers. Let me call them missionaries or co-workers. A couple with a husband called Aquila and a wife Priscilla. How did these two meet? When you go to Acts chapter 18, that's where Paul meets Aquila and the wife Priscilla. Now Acts 18:1 says, after these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to them. So because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for by occupation they were tent makers. Praise the Lord. So you see this so we're talking about how the church in Rome began. Paul has never been to Rome, but we suspect that it was started by this couple, Aquila and Priscilla. They must have had a hand in starting the church and remember, in the earlier church, people were meeting in households. So there is this couple, Aquila and the wife Priscilla. They were living in Rome. They were living in Rome, but this ruler Claudius comes into power and he chases all Jews from Rome. So these guys are chased from Rome, and they come to Corinth, and Paul has left Athens, and he comes to Corinth, and that's where he meets these people. These people have been chased from their home in Rome. They were Jews, but they were staying in Rome. They've been chased there, this couple, and they come to Corinth, and that's where they meet Paul. Paul has also just left Athens and has come to Corinth, and that's where they meet. And he stays with them. And surprisingly, they were both into the same trade. They were both tent makers, so they worked. He stayed with them, they were housing him, I think. He stayed with them. They were making tents probably together. So that's how this couple met. But what brings us to the conclusion that these guys must have started the church together? When you go back to Romans 16, verses 3, this is what he says: greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. So after a certain period of time, we believe that things settled. And remember, this letter is to the Romans. It's going to Rome. Look, now, but in Acts 18, we have seen that Priscilla and Aquila, they were chased by Claudius. All Jews were chased out of Rome. But now, at this particular time, he's writing and he's sending greetings to them. It means they, at some point, returned to Rome. When things had settled, probably when there was a certain change of power, I don't know, I'm not certain for sure. But at some point, Aquila and his wife Priscilla, they returned back to Rome. And that's why when he's writing this letter, he's sending greetings. To them because at some point they must have worked together and then departed, and these guys came back to their home. That was Rome, where they were staying. So this church was most likely started by his missionary friends Priscilla and Aquila. Yes. So remember, Paul he must have even have led this couple to the Lord, because he spent a number of time, quite a while with them. And he was all over making disciples, preaching the gospel. Yeah. Yeah. So basically, that's how the church in Rome began. Yeah. That's how the church in Rome began. Paul meets Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth after them being chased from Rome from Italy by Claudius. These two spend the couple and Paul spend a lot of time together. And I believe at some point when things had settled down home, this couple goes back, and I think they started that church. They started that church, and it grew. It grew slowly by slowly. Yeah. So the other thing I want us to look at, probably will be our last thing, is why Paul was writing to them. Yeah. When you go to Romans chapter 1, it's all in there really. Romans chapter 1, let's start from verse 9. For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you in my prayer, always in my prayers, making request, if by some means now at least I may find a way in the will of God to come to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gifts, so that you may be established. That is, that I may be encouraged together with you by the mutual faith, both of you and me. Now I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that I often planned to come to you, but was hindered until now, that I may have some fruit among you also, just also among other Gentiles. I am a debtor both to Greeks and to the barbarians, both to the wise and to the unwise. So as much as is in me, I am ready to preach the gospel to you all, to you who are in Rome also. So why was Paul writing? Paul was writing for specifically two reasons. He really wanted to visit the church in Rome. Remember, he has not been there. The church is flourishing, but he has never been there. And yet he wants to come. His desire is to let these guys know that, you guys, I'm thinking about you. I want to come and see you. I want to come and impart some spiritual gift, that I may be encouraged by both your faith and also there may be that mutual encouragement by both your faith and mine. Yeah, so he wants to come and impart a spiritual gift. He wants to come and, hang out with them and see them and greet the brethren. Up to this point, he's still busy. He's actually says that, guys, I don't want you to be unaware. I'm always trying to pray and do this. And like, if God will create an opportunity, I really desire to come and I really want to come and be with you and chill with you guys. And we just have sweet fellowship together. Koinonia, we just have koinonia together. Amen. Yeah, so that was one. And then he also desired to preach the gospel. Now, let me explain this second thing right. Now, look, Rome has Gentiles, let me call them Italians, to the great extent, and a few Jews who are living there, like, for example, Priscilla and Aquila. Now, I don't know, the Jews may have increased in number. Remember when Moses, Pharaoh chased did he chase them? Look, he made the Jews, the Israelites, now I'm in Exodus, he made the Israelites, because of their increasing numbers, he subjected them to labor and all that. Probably it's the same thing that was happening in Rome. It seems like the number of Jews had increased at some point, and the Roman culture was being diluted a certain way. It's probably that, and that's why Claudius comes up and says, I don't like these Jews, get out of here. So he chases them, yeah, and then at some point some of them come back, like, for example, Priscilla and Aquila. Now, look, you have Gentiles, they have their own beliefs. You have Jews who also have their own beliefs. Look, Jews, they believe in the law of Moses, they have all this Sabbath, circumcision, and now we have Romans who don't believe in that stuff. They probably have their pagan gods. Yeah, they have their pagan gods. They don't believe in what Jesus, who is that Jesus? We don't know him. Look, for us, we are not under any law. We don't know those things of the law. So, look, Paul wants to preach the gospel, but it's for a good cause, because you're having a mixture of cultures in here. You have Romans who are purely Italians, and then you are having Jews who also have their. So it was a mashup. There was a lot of confusion in there. These guys are circumcised. These are not circumcised. Which is which? What is what? Yeah. So That's another reason why Paul wanted to clear. And if you go through the gospel, if you have read through the book of Romans, I know many of you who are listening, it's not your first time, you will see that he's dealing, the first portions it talks about, he first addresses those who think, the atheists. He talks about the atheists. Then he will talk about, at some point, he will talk about the moralists. At some point, he talks about the religious Jews and how they can't save themselves. So he's in this letter, he's dealing with different kinds of people. At some point, he's talking about people who think there is no God and they can live anyhow. At some point, he's talking about the Jews, because Rome remember, it's a capital city. It is full of trade. It has a lot of people. So there was a lot of, all manner of doctrine must have been in there. So he really desires to put these guys in the gospel so that they know what is right. The Jews who are there, they need to pull up their stockings and know what the true gospel is. And to the Gentiles, he needs to tell them what's up. Yeah, so I think you're getting the idea why he really desired to preach the gospel to them. So he wants to visit them because he's never been there, but also to clear up doctrine. Because the churches must have been mixed. The churches that must have been started must have had some Gentiles, but also some Jews. And these guys must have been fighting. You guys, we are celebrating the Passover. What is the Passover? For us, we don't know those things. Look, for us, we believe to be justified, you need to be circumcised. You must be keeping the whole law to the brim. And these guys are like, for us, we don't know the law. What? And must have been that kind of conflict. Yeah, so those are the reasons why Paul wrote the letter, why he was writing to this. First of all, he planned to visit them to impart some spiritual gifts, and secondly, to preach the gospel. Yeah, because he's a debtor. I felt like he was indebted to preach the gospel both to the Greek and to the barbarians, to the Jew and to the Gentiles. The Greek and barbarian, basically the Greek is the land and the barbarian the unland. He really felt like what was on Paul's heart, like, you guys, I want to preach the gospel. That's what's whether it's to Jew or to Gentiles, I don't care. Whether it's to the land, that is the Greek, or to the barbarian, I don't care. I want to preach the gospel. So that was what's on his heart. Yeah, what was the message? Message is basically the gospel. I am not ashamed of the gospel. That's what he says in 16, verse 16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's a message, it's the power of God unto salvation for everyone who believes. Yeah, so the message is the gospel, and the theme is really mostly the righteousness of God, the grace of God, justification. Everything is really rotating about the grace of God and his righteousness, the imputed righteousness of God. That's really the main theme of this book, and that's really what the gospel is all about. Yeah. So as I conclude, the book can be divided into 3 sections. The first section, chapter 1 to 8, talk about doctrinal faith is the main subject, salvation by faith and justification. That's chapter 1 to 8. In chapter 9 to 11, they talk about, it's a dispensational chapter. It talks about it's a section of the dispensation that deals with the nation of Israel, its past, its present, and its future. And then chapter 12 to chapter 16, it talks about duty. Those who have been justified have a duty. We have a duty, yeah. So that's how you can divide the book of Romans. Yeah, and I hope you guys are blessed. Basically, that's really the simple introduction of the book of Romans and the author and why it was written. Yeah. So see you guys next week. I'll be starting with chapter 1, obviously, and we'll see where we'll stop. Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in. May God bless you. See you next week. Yeah. God bless you. I love you.